As the suns of Gliese set in hues of deep purple and fiery orange, the alien historian Xantrix set his sights on a forgotten structure on Earth's moon. Clad in his atmospheric suit, he maneuvered through the lunar ruins until he found what he had been seeking, an unassuming entrance, hidden beneath the debris of an ancient satellite. Finally, Xantrix whispered to himself, his voice echoing slightly inside his helmet. He activated his suit's light beam, illuminating the dusty path that led into the depths of the archives. Inside, rows upon rows of digital tomes and artifacts awaited, preserved by the vacuum of space. Xantrix's excitement was palpable. He had traveled across galaxies for this moment, the chance to understand the silent power of humanity. As he delved deeper into the archives, his communicator crackled to life. "Xantrix, do you copy?" "It's Jonathan," said a voice, smooth and calm. "Yes, Jonathan, I'm inside," Xantrix replied, adjusting the frequency. "It's more extensive than we anticipated." Jonathan, a former Earth diplomat who had settled on Gliese, chuckled softly. Humanity always did have a penchant for record-keeping. "Are you at the central hub yet?" "Approaching now," Xantrix answered, his footsteps echoing off the metal floor. The central hub was a vast dome, screens and datapads littered everywhere. Xantrix approached a console, activating it. The screen flickered to life, displaying logs and records of diplomatic missions, secret negotiations, and cultural exchanges. Jonathan's voice broke through again. "Look for the Gemini Accord files. Those should give you a real sense of how humans managed to negotiate peace where none seemed possible." Navigating through the digital archives with Jonathan's guidance felt like a shared adventure. Xantrix located the Gemini Accord files and opened them. The screen displayed videos and transcripts of humans mediating between two warring alien species. "See how the human negotiator positions himself, always ensuring he's physically lower than the others. It's a sign of respect in many cultures," Jonathan pointed out, observing Xantrix's screen through a shared virtual interface. Xantrix nodded, taking notes. Incredible. Their understanding of cultural nuances might be unrivaled. They were always good listeners, more than anything. It gave them an edge, Jonathan added, his voice tinged with admiration. As they reviewed more files, Jonathan narrated anecdotes from his own experiences with human diplomats. His tales filled the stark, cold archive with life, casting shadows of people who had navigated the delicate threads of galactic peace. "Jonathan, why did you leave Earth?" Xantrix asked suddenly, curious about the man who had become his mentor. There was a pause. Sometimes, to really understand peace, you need to step away from your own kind. See the universe through others' eyes. It was the best way I knew how to keep building what I believed in. The historian and the diplomat spent hours exchanging knowledge and stories, piecing together the complex tapestry of human diplomacy. As the lunar night deepened outside, Xantrix realized he was not just uncovering history. He was learning the art of peace from a master. "Thank you, Jonathan," he said sincerely, "for sharing this with me. It's a new beginning, Xantrix. Perhaps, through you, the galaxy will remember the art of peace, as practiced by humanity." Together, in the silence of the archives, surrounded by the legacy of a species that had mastered the quiet strength of diplomacy, they forged a new understanding. And for Xantrix, this was just the beginning. Chapter 2. The Human Enigma. The early light of Gliese's twin suns filtered through the window of Jonathan's modest dwelling, casting long shadows across the room where he and Xantrix were seated with steaming cups of a traditional Earth beverage, coffee. "So, Xantrix, what did you find most surprising about the archives yesterday?" Jonathan asked, breaking the morning silence. Xantrix pondered, sipping his coffee cautiously. "I was struck by the range of human emotion displayed during negotiations. It's like a dance of words and gestures, each move calculated yet deeply sincere. Jonathan smiled, nodding. Human diplomacy often looked like a paradox to outsiders. We thrived in the grey spaces, using our emotional insight to guide us. Let me tell you about the parallax confrontation. It's not in your files, but it should be. Leaning forward, Xantrix listened intently as Jonathan recounted a critical moment when Earth was faced with an imminent threat from a technologically superior alien fleet. Instead of escalating the situation, the human negotiators chose to engage in dialogue. The lead negotiator, Captain Miles, initiated a broadcast across all frequencies, openly sharing our intentions for peace and collaboration. He exposed the vulnerabilities of both sides, creating a mutual understanding of the potential loss we all faced, Jonathan detailed. Wasn't that incredibly risky? Showing weakness to an adversary? Xantrix questioned, intrigued. It was, Jonathan admitted. But Miles understood something crucial. True strength often comes from acknowledging your vulnerabilities. That move created a bond of trust, not just a ceasefire. As they discussed further, the door chimed. Another human, Sarah, who worked as a cultural liaison on Gliese, entered. She joined them with a curious glance. "Are we sharing war stories or peace stories this morning?" "Peace stories, Sarah. Help us enlighten Xantrix about the art of human diplomacy," Jonathan said with a warm welcome. Sarah pulled up a chair, her presence adding a new layer to the morning's conversation. "I've seen humans turn desperate situations into forums for understanding. It's all about finding common ground, sometimes over a meal or a shared problem." The trio spent the morning diving deeper into human history. Jonathan and Sarah shared their experiences, from tense galactic summits to quiet, behind-the-scenes negotiations that averted crises unseen by the public eye. "Humans have a saying," Sarah added, "an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." We applied that in diplomacy, preventing conflicts by building relationships. Xantrix, absorbing every word, started to see a pattern. It seems human diplomacy was not just about preventing wars, but also about weaving a fabric of interconnectedness, making the idea of war less appealing. "Exactly," Jonathan confirmed. "We aimed to make war obsolete, a relic of our past. Sometimes the battles we didn't fight were our greatest victories." As the day progressed, they simulated a diplomatic negotiation, with Xantrix role-playing an alien diplomat. Jonathan and Sarah coached him through the nuances of human negotiation tactics, emphasizing empathy, patience, and strategic transparency. Through this role-play, Xantrix not only learned about human strategies, but also experienced the emotional depth and tactical intellect involved in real-time human diplomacy. Each scenario taught him more about the subtle power that had kept Earth at peace. By the end of their session, as Gliese's suns began to set, casting a golden glow over the room, Xantrix felt a profound respect for the intricate mastery of human relations. "Thank you both for today. I feel as if I've walked through a course in human wisdom," Xantrix acknowledged, his voice reflecting his deep appreciation. Jonathan, with a content smile, concluded, "Remember, Xantrix, diplomacy isn't about manipulating others, but about forging a path to mutual prosperity. It's the legacy we hope to pass on, through you." Together they stood, looking out at the fading light, understanding that the lessons shared today were seeds of peace that might one day bloom across the galaxy. Chapter 3: Whispers of the Past. The following day found Xantrix and Jonathan in Jonathan's study, surrounded by screens displaying historical data and diplomatic archives. The cool interior provided a respite from Gliese's warm afternoon sun, and the low hum of the data processors added a soothing background noise. "So, you mentioned yesterday about human strategies that involved psychological insight and misinformation. Can you explain that with an example?" Xantrix inquired, genuinely curious about the subtler aspects of human diplomacy. Jonathan toggled through his database, pulling up a specific incident. Let's discuss the Orion standoff. It was a situation that could have easily escalated into full-blown conflict, but was diffused almost invisibly. Xantrix leaned closer, his eyes scanning the information. I see. It says here that the human negotiators spread rumors about the economic benefits of peace. How did that work? It was quite strategic, Jonathan began. The negotiators knew that the opposing species, the Vantrex, valued prosperity over territorial gains. So, they initiated secret communications with influential Vantrex traders, subtly suggesting how peace could open new trade routes and thus profit them enormously. A new voice chimed in from the doorway. Are you guys diving into the Orion standoff without me? It was Michael, a former intelligence officer for Earth, who had since retired to Gliese. Michael, perfect timing. Jonathan greeted him with a smile. We were just discussing the use of strategic misinformation. Maybe you can shed some light on the intelligence operations from that time. Michael entered, pulling up a chair beside them. Happy to. The key was in the timing. We intercepted communications indicating that the Vantrex were uncertain about their next steps. By introducing attractive alternatives to war through back channels, we swayed the opinion of their decision-makers without them realizing they were being influenced by us. Xantrix absorbed the details, fascinated. So, it wasn't just about lying, but more about guiding their thinking towards a mutually beneficial outcome? Exactly, Michael confirmed. It was about creating a narrative where the best choice for them was peace, even though they thought it was their idea all along. The discussion shifted as Jonathan introduced another scenario. Let's role-play a bit here. Xantrix, imagine you're a Vantrex leader, and Michael, you're the human diplomat. I'll be your advisor. Let's see how you could apply these strategies. As they role-played, Xantrix tried to channel what he had learned, using subtle hints and strategic suggestions to guide Michael's decisions as the Vantrex leader. The exercise was enlightening, showing him how indirect approaches could sometimes yield stronger results than direct confrontation. After several rounds, Michael leaned back, impressed. You're getting the hang of it, Xantrix. It's all about understanding what the other side values and framing your arguments in that context. The session lasted well into the evening, with the three of them dissecting multiple past encounters where human diplomats had used psychology, economic incentives, and cultural insights to shape the outcomes of potential conflicts. As they concluded, Jonathan reflected, what we practice today might seem like simple conversations, but in the cosmos, these are the dialogues that save worlds. Michael nodded in agreement. It's these quiet moves behind the scenes that have often kept peace when all seemed lost. Xantrix felt a profound admiration for the craft of diplomacy. I used to think diplomacy was all about grand gestures and treaties signed at large tables. Now I see it's much more. It's the quiet whispers and small moments that build the real bridges. Together, they reviewed their notes from the day, planning to meet again to continue their exploration of human diplomatic history. As Xantrix left Jonathan's study that night, the stars overhead seemed to twinkle a bit brighter, each one a silent witness to the quiet power of diplomacy. Chapter 4. The Relic of the Silent War. In the cool shade of an ancient Glesian tree, Xantrix and Jonathan sorted through a collection of artifacts that Jonathan had acquired over his years of service. Each piece held a story, a fragment of human history that Xantrix was eager to understand. This one looks different, Xantrix noted, picking up a metallic object shaped like a sphere with intricate engravings. It shimmered slightly in the filtered sunlight. Jonathan glanced over, recognition lighting his face. Ah, that's a very special piece. It's called the Sibylline Orb. It was instrumental during the Silent War, a conflict averted almost entirely through covert diplomacy. How was it used? Xantrix asked, turning the orb over in his hands. It was a communication device, but not in the traditional sense. It transmitted a signal that could be decoded into a message promoting peace, but only by those who were willing to listen. It was sent as a gift to each of the potential belligerent leaders, Jonathan explained. Michael joined them, having come to participate in their daily discussion. I remember when that was deployed. There was a lot of skepticism about whether it would work. Jonathan smiled. Yes, there was. But the orb carried a recording of Earth's greatest diplomats advocating for peace and unity. It detailed the economic and social benefits of avoiding war, appealing directly to the leaders' sense of prosperity and stability. Xantrix held the orb up, intrigued. So, it conveyed a message of peace without any direct interaction? Exactly, Michael added. It's a perfect example of how humans use technology not just for advancement, but also for preventing conflicts in subtle ways. Curious to see it in action, Xantrix asked. Can it still be activated? Let's find out, Jonathan said, reaching for a small device from his bag. He adjusted some settings and pointed it at the orb. After a moment, the orb hummed to life, projecting a hologram of a serene Earth landscape and the sounds of various Earth languages speaking harmoniously. The voices you hear are those of our leaders, each speaking to their counterparts across the universe, sharing a vision of what could be achieved together in peace, Jonathan narrated as they watched the hologram play out. Moved by the display, Xantrix reflected, it's like a beacon, but instead of warning of danger, it illuminates the path to peace. That's a good way to put it, Michael agreed. Many times, these softer approaches were more effective than any show of force could have been. They spent the afternoon discussing other instances where similar tactics had been employed, analyzing the outcomes and the lessons learned. Jonathan shared more stories, each underscoring the innovative and peaceful methods used by humans to maintain stability. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the group, Xantrix turned to his companions. I've learned more about humanity in these few days than I have in my entire academic career. Your history is not just about the wars you've fought, but more importantly, about the ones you've prevented. True strength, Jonathan said, pausing to look at the orb now quiet in Xantrix's hands, sometimes lies in the courage to choose peace when war seems inevitable. They packed up the artifacts, each piece carefully wrapped and stored with respect. As they walked back to Jonathan's home, the conversation continued, plans forming for more sessions, more learning. That evening, as Xantrix prepared to leave, he felt a profound sense of connection, not just to Jonathan and Michael, but to the very essence of diplomacy they had imparted. He was beginning to see his own role in the galaxy not just as a chronicler of history, but as a potential peacemaker, inspired by the human legacy of quiet but profound diplomacy. Chapter 5. Lessons in Humanity. The next morning, the soft hum of the data processors filled the room as Jonathan and Xantrix resumed their exploration of human culture and its myriad influences on diplomacy and peacekeeping strategies. Today, they were joined by David, a former cultural attaché at the Human Embassy on Zeta Reticuli. Good to see you, Xantrix and Jonathan. Always a pleasure, David greeted them, his voice warm and inviting. David, we've been delving into the nuances of human diplomacy. I thought you could share some insights into how cultural understanding played a role, Jonathan said, setting up a virtual display of various human cultural festivals. Absolutely, David replied, taking a seat next to Xantrix. Human diplomacy wasn't just about preventing conflicts. It was deeply rooted in our understanding and respect for diverse cultures. For example, consider the Festival of Lights, celebrated in many parts of Earth. It symbolizes the triumph of light over darkness, knowledge over ignorance. Xantrix watched as images of vibrant celebrations filled the screen. How did this translate into diplomacy? It's all about context and empathy, David explained. In negotiations, being aware of such cultural significances can help bridge gaps that politics and economics fail to close. Sharing a festival can be as powerful as a treaty. Jonathan nodded in agreement. There was a time when such a festival coincided with crucial peace talks on Vander 4. We invited the delegates to join the celebration, helping soften negotiations considerably. Intrigued, Xantrix asked, "Did the delegates participate?" "They did," Jonathan replied with a smile. Seeing humans in a context of joy and community gave them a new perspective on who they were negotiating with. Not just political entities, but people with families, hopes, and traditions. David added, "It broke down barriers. When you see your counterparts sharing food and laughter with their family, it's harder to demonize them over the negotiating table." The morning passed with further discussions about other cultural practices that influenced diplomatic interactions. David shared several anecdotes where understanding and respecting cultural norms had led to breakthroughs in deadlocked talks. "Let's try an exercise," David suggested. "Think of a cultural practice from your own world, Xantrix, that might help in a hypothetical negotiation scenario." Xantrix thought for a moment, then described a Glesian ritual of sharing stories about ancestors, which was used to build trust and respect among clans. Could something like this be adapted in interstellar diplomacy? "Definitely," Jonathan responded. "It's about finding common ground, a universal desire to honor where we come from. That could be a powerful foundation for beginning talks." As they role-played a scenario using Xantrix's ritual, the alien historian felt a growing confidence in his understanding of how deeply human values influenced their diplomatic efforts. As the session drew to a close, David remarked, "You see, diplomacy is often seen as a strategy game, but at its heart, it's really about human connections. The stronger those are, the more enduring the peace." Jonathan and Xantrix thanked David for his insights, and as he left, Jonathan turned to Xantrix. "How about tomorrow we look at some of the physical artifacts from Earth's diplomatic missions? There's a lot you can learn from the gifts exchanged between leaders." "That sounds fascinating," Xantrix replied, eager for the next lesson. As he left Jonathan's house, he reflected on the morning's conversations. It wasn't just the strategies but the human element that made Earth's diplomacy so effective, a lesson he was eager to share with the wider galaxy. Chapter 6. The Dance of Unity. Late afternoon found Jonathan and Xantrix in a spacious room, cleared of furniture to provide ample space for movement. Today, Jonathan had promised to introduce Xantrix to a more personal aspect of human culture, the dance. As strange as it might sound, dance has been a fundamental part of human diplomacy in many cases, Jonathan explained, setting up a music device. It's not just an art form but a way of communication, of sharing stories and emotions without words. Xantrix, curious and a bit skeptical, watched as Jonathan selected a slow, melodious tune. "So, we're going to dance?" he asked, unsure of what to expect. "Yes, but think of it not just as dance. Consider it a form of non-verbal negotiation, where each movement and gesture is a part of a conversation," Jonathan replied, stepping into the open space. He began by showing Xantrix simple steps, a basic rhythm to follow. Each culture has its dances. This one is a waltz, often danced at formal occasions on Earth. As the music flowed, Jonathan led, demonstrating how to guide and follow, the give and take that mirrored a diplomatic dialogue. "Notice how we communicate through movement. It's about trust, about predicting and responding to your partner's actions." Xantrix followed, gradually getting the hang of the steps. "I see. It's like a negotiation. Each person has to adjust to maintain the flow." "Exactly." Jonathan smiled. "And just like in diplomacy, if you step on your partner's foot, it's not the end. It's about how you recover, how you smooth over the misstep." As they danced, the door opened, and another former diplomat, Edward, entered. He was an expert in cultural exchanges and had used dance in many of his missions to build rapport. "Am I interrupting, or can I join the dance?" Edward asked with a light-hearted grin. "Perfect timing, Edward," Jonathan said, pausing the music. "We were just discussing how dance relates to diplomacy. Maybe you can share some of your experiences." Edward stepped into the dance space as Jonathan restarted the music. On many occasions, participating in a local dance was the turning point in negotiations. It showed respect and willingness to embrace the other culture. The three of them moved together, Edward and Jonathan expertly demonstrating more complex moves, which Xantrix attempted to mimic. Laughter and light conversation filled the room, easing the initial awkwardness Xantrix felt. "Dance breaks down barriers," Edward explained as they took a brief pause. "It reveals a side of people that formal meetings never could. It's joy, sorrow, passion, all the universal emotions." Jonathan nodded, adding, "It also teaches you to be in the moment, fully present with the other person. That's essential in any diplomatic encounter." They continued dancing, switching partners and styles, each dance shedding light on different aspects of human interaction: coordination, cooperation, and mutual respect. As the session ended, Xantrix felt a newfound appreciation for the human approach to diplomacy. "This was enlightening. I understand now how such a simple act can convey so much." Edward chuckled. "Sometimes, the most profound lessons are learned in the most unexpected ways." "Thank you both," Xantrix said sincerely. "Today was about more than just learning steps. It was about understanding the rhythm of human relations." As they left the dance floor, Jonathan suggested, "Let's meet tomorrow at the local archive. I have some visual records of historical dances that played key roles in Earth's diplomacy. Seeing them might give you even deeper insights." Xantrix agreed, eager to continue his exploration of human culture and its diplomatic applications. Walking home under the starlit sky, he felt as though he was not just learning about humanity but becoming a part of it. Chapter 7. The Galactic Message. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the local archive as Jonathan and Xantrix walked through its heavy, ornate doors. Today's focus was on the historical impact of dance and other cultural expressions in diplomacy. Jonathan led Xantrix to a viewing room, where large screens lined the walls. "Here, we can access visual records from Earth's diplomatic archives. You'll see firsthand how cultural exchanges, particularly dances, influenced interstellar relations," he explained, powering up the system. As the screens flickered to life, the first video showed a grand ball from Earth's early 20th century, where diplomats from various countries were engaged in a waltz. "Notice how everyone is paying attention to rhythm and synchronization. It's a metaphor for diplomatic alignment," Jonathan noted. Xantrix watched intently, fascinated by the elegance and the subtle communication between partners. "It seems like a dance floor can be as strategic as a battlefield." Indeed, a new voice joined in. It was George, a historian specializing in cultural diplomacy. He had arrived just in time to add his expertise to the discussion. Dance often prepared the ground for difficult conversations. It eased tensions and fostered a shared sense of community. The next video shifted to a more recent event, showing Earth representatives participating in an alien festival, their movements awkward but earnest. George commented here, the effort to participate, despite the clumsiness, was seen as a sincere gesture of respect. It turned the tide in ongoing trade negotiations. Jonathan used a control panel to pause the video on a smiling human diplomat, surrounded by alien delegates. This moment right here was crucial. The smile, the relaxed posture, non-verbal cues that communicated goodwill more effectively than words. Xantrix was struck by the simplicity yet effectiveness of the approach. How can we craft a message using these principles that would resonate across the galaxy today? That's a good question, George replied. What if we create a new broadcast, a message of peace and unity, using Earth's legacy of cultural diplomacy as the foundation? Jonathan liked the idea. We could use the Sibylline orb again, enhance it with recordings of various cultural expressions from around the galaxy, each showing a commitment to understanding and peace. The three men spent the afternoon brainstorming and compiling footage and recordings. They selected clips of dance, music, and art from different cultures, each chosen for its emotional and symbolic power. Xantrix suggested, let's also include statements from various leaders speaking about their cultural practices, emphasizing their universal values. Excellent idea, George agreed. It will show that despite our many differences, the fundamentals of hope, joy, and peace are common to all. As they worked, the project grew into something greater than they had anticipated. It was not just a message. It was a testament to the possibility of unity in diversity. Once the message was ready, they gathered around the Sibylline orb, now connected to a transmitter. Jonathan initiated the sequence, and the orb began to emit a soft, pulsating light. This message will now travel across space, reaching every corner of the galaxy, Jonathan announced as they watched the light intensify. May it be as a dance, inviting all to join in unity, Xantrix added, moved by the potential impact of their work. The three stood together, watching the light fade into the distance, each feeling a profound sense of accomplishment and hope. This was not just a diplomatic endeavor. It was a call to the heart of every sentient being in the galaxy. As they left the archive, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, echoing the sentiment of their message, a silent call to come together in peace and understanding. Chapter 8. The Echoes of Peace. The stars above Gliese seemed to ripple with a quiet energy as Jonathan, Xantrix, and George stood on the terrace of the archive, watching the Sibylline orb's signal disappear into the vastness of space. The gravity of what they had done settled over them, but it was accompanied by a cautious optimism. "Do you think they'll listen?" Xantrix asked, his voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and doubt. Jonathan leaned on the railing, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "If history has taught me anything, it's that the smallest gestures often have the largest impact. The key is patience." George nodded in agreement, adjusting his glasses. Cultural diplomacy relies on planting seeds. It's not about immediate change, but the slow, deliberate nurturing of understanding. "Give it time, Xantrix." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from Jonathan's communicator. A holographic projection shimmered to life, revealing the face of an alien delegate from the Xanath Collective, a species once considered hostile. "Jonathan," the alien began, its voice deep and measured, "we received the broadcast. I wanted to express gratitude on behalf of my council. It is rare to see such sincerity. We are discussing it now." Jonathan exchanged a glance with Xantrix and George, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Thank you for reaching out. The message wasn't just from us. It was meant for everyone. We hope it encourages open dialogue." The alien hesitated, as if weighing its words carefully. "Perhaps it is time to revisit certain old grudges. This could be the beginning of something new." As the transmission ended, Xantrix exhaled, realizing he had been holding his breath. "That's one. Do you think others will follow?" "They will," George said with confidence. "Once one species steps forward, others will see the potential benefits. Fear is a powerful motivator, but so is hope when it's given the right form." The three men spent the next several days monitoring responses to the broadcast. Messages began trickling in, some tentative, others enthusiastic. Delegations requested meetings, Old allies reconnected, and long-standing hostilities began to thaw. On the fifth day, a delegation from the Vantrex Empire, one of the galaxy's most rigid and warlike factions, sent an official communication. Their leader, a towering figure named Lorthak, appeared on the hologram. "We received your broadcast," Lorthak said bluntly. "It was unexpected." Jonathan straightened. "Unexpected, perhaps, but necessary. There's been too much silence where dialogue should have been." Lorthak's expression softened, just slightly. "Your approach is unusual. No threats, no demands. Only an invitation." "That's the nature of diplomacy," Jonathan replied. "It's not about forcing anyone's hand, but opening doors." The conversation continued, each side carefully probing the other, but by the end, Lorthak agreed to attend an intergalactic summit to discuss broader peace initiatives. After the transmission ended, Xantrix looked at Jonathan with awe. "How do you do it? How do you stay so composed in the face of such uncertainty?" Jonathan chuckled softly. "Experience, Xantrix, and trust in the process. Diplomacy is as much about listening as it is about speaking." George added, "And it's about persistence. Not every conversation will yield results, but every conversation matters." The summit took place a week later on a neutral moon orbiting Gliese. Delegations from dozens of species attended, including the Vantrex and Zarnath. Jonathan, Xantrix, and George represented humanity, their presence a reminder of the quiet strength that had brought the galaxy to this pivotal moment. During the summit, Xantrix observed Jonathan and George in action. Their ability to read the room, to adapt their approach depending on who they were speaking to, was mesmerizing. They didn't push or demand, but guided the conversations with patience and insight. By the end of the summit, several key agreements were signed, including a commitment to open cultural exchanges across species. The Sibylline Orb, now recognized as a symbol of peace, was placed in a central galactic archive for all to see. As the delegations dispersed, Lorthak approached Jonathan. "I misjudged your species," he admitted. "You wield influence not through might, but through understanding. It's disarming." Jonathan extended a hand. "We hope it's also inspiring. The galaxy is stronger when we work together." Lorthak hesitated but shook his hand, sealing a new chapter in interstellar relations. Back on Gliese, as they reflected on the events, Xantrix turned to Jonathan and George. "This experience has changed me. I came here as a historian, but now I see myself as something more, a participant in the story." Jonathan clapped him on the shoulder. "That's the greatest role you can play, Xantrix. Being part of the solution." As the stars shone brightly above them, the three men sat in companionable silence, knowing that their actions had set the galaxy on a new path. And somewhere, echoing across the cosmos, was the message they had crafted, a quiet yet powerful reminder of humanity's legacy. Why no species will risk angering humanity again after the last galactic war?